She pulled a half-conscious warrior across the burning sands. Unaware, he was the war leader, only Heir. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The sun hung heavy in the sky, casting an oppressive heat across the vast desert. The wind whipped the dry sand into stinging gusts, cutting through the air like tiny needles. As far as the eye could see, there was nothing but endless stretches of barren earth and an unforgiving sky. In the middle of this wasteland, a figure staggered, struggling to stay upright as the heat sucked the very life out of him. He was barely conscious, his body swaying with each laborious step, and the weight of his own blood-stained clothes only added to the crushing weight of his exhaustion. His breath came in ragged gasps, each inhale feeling like it would be his last. He had no idea where he was going, or if he would make it. He only knew that he couldn't stop. He had to keep moving, or the desert would claim him, as it had claimed so many others before. And then, in the distance, he saw her. A woman, walking alone across the burning sands. She appeared to be heading in his direction, though he was too disoriented to fully comprehend the reality of the situation. Her silhouette seemed almost ethereal against the golden backdrop of the desert. Her face was determined, focused, yet there was something about her presence that was both strange and familiar. As he stumbled, his legs buckling beneath him, he found himself falling into the scorching earth, his vision blurring at the edges. But before he could hit the ground, a strong pair of hands grabbed him, lifting him with surprising strength. "Come on," she whispered, her voice firm but soft. "I've got you." Her grip was unyielding, and though he barely had the strength to keep his eyes open, he felt an odd sense of safety in her presence. His mind screamed at him to fight, to escape. Whatever fate this woman had in mind, but his body was already on the edge of collapse. He could barely keep his head from swaying as she hauled him forward, one step after another, through the unforgiving desert. She didn't hesitate, didn't question. She just kept moving. "We're almost there," she muttered, as if speaking to herself more than to him. "Stay with me." He wanted to protest, to tell her that she couldn't save him, that it was already too late. But the words wouldn't come. His body felt like it was giving up on him, surrendering to the harshness of the environment and the weight of his wounds. All he could do was lean into her, trusting her strength more than his own. Time seemed to stretch on endlessly as the heat bore down on them. But finally, after what felt like hours, they reached a shaded rock outcrop, a temporary shelter from the relentless sun. The woman lowered him gently to the ground, her hands working swiftly to check his wounds. He could barely focus on her movements, but the tenderness with which she tended to him stood in stark contrast to the brutality of the desert. She spoke softly as she worked, her words unintelligible to him, but the calmness in her tone offered a strange sense of peace. Slowly, his vision cleared, and the first thing he saw when he opened his eyes was her face, determined, yet kind, with a strength that seemed to defy the desert around them. He tried to say something, but his voice was a mere rasp, barely audible. She seemed to hear him anyway. "You're going to be all right," she assured him. "Just rest. I'm not going anywhere." As he lay there, the desert still raging around them, the only thing that mattered was that, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he wasn't alone. He wasn't sure who this woman was, or why she had come to his aid. But as the hours passed, and the burning sands slowly began to cool, he realized something deep within his bones. She had saved him, and though he couldn't explain it yet, this moment would change everything. For both of them. The hours passed slowly, and the desert heat finally began to fade as the sun dipped lower in the sky. The air grew cooler, but the damage had already been done. She hadn't let go of him since they reached the shelter, her hands still pressed against his wounds, her eyes scanning the horizon every few moments, as if expecting something, or someone, to appear. He was barely conscious, his body too broken and battered to do much more than breathe. But as the darkness of the desert night crept in, his mind began to clear. He could hear her soft voice, the constant murmur of comfort she offered as she worked tirelessly to tend to his injuries. He tried to focus on her, on her presence, but everything around him felt distant and fuzzy. Still, the warmth of her touch, the quiet determination in her movements, brought him a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. His mind drifted in and out, images of distant battles and lost friends flashing before his eyes. Each time he woke, she was there, her hands gentle as she tended to his wounds, whispering softly to him, urging him to hold on. Time seemed to stretch as he lay there, but eventually, he was able to sit up, albeit shakily. She didn't ask any questions. She didn't pressure him. She simply helped him to his feet and guided him to the shelter's edge, where they could look out at the desert stretching endlessly beneath a blanket of stars. The silence between them was comfortable, not awkward, as if they had known each other far longer than the hours they had spent together. The fire crackled quietly beside them, its light flickering off the jagged rocks that surrounded their temporary shelter. He finally spoke, his voice hoarse, a mere whisper against the desert winds. "Why did you help me?" The words seemed strange, even to him, as if asking her was an admission of his own vulnerability. She didn't hesitate, her gaze steady as she met his eyes. "Because you needed help," she replied simply. Her answer was so direct, so uncomplicated, that it left him momentarily speechless. He opened his mouth to say more, but the words stuck in his throat. He had never been the one to need help. He had always been the one to give it. He had always been the warrior, the leader, the protector. And yet, here he was, depending on a woman he had never met to save his life. The irony wasn't lost on him. But as he watched her, the calm in her presence began to fill the empty spaces inside him. He had never felt anything like this before. The feeling was unsettling, but also comforting. "I didn't think I would make it," he admitted after a moment. "I didn't think anyone would find me." She shook her head slightly, as if his words didn't register as important. "You don't need to think about that now. You're safe." There was a conviction in her voice that he hadn't expected. Safe. The word felt foreign to him, like something that didn't belong in his world. But he didn't argue. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to simply be, to let someone else take charge. He glanced down at his hands, the ones that had once been steady and lethal, now trembling slightly. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice tinged with curiosity and gratitude. She hesitated for a brief moment, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her cloak as if she were unsure of how much to reveal. "A traveler," she said finally, a quiet smile crossing her lips. "Just someone passing through." He raised an eyebrow, sensing there was more to her story than she was willing to share. But he didn't press. For the first time, he didn't feel the need to. The truth was, he wasn't sure if he even wanted to know. She was here now, and that was enough. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the distant howl of a coyote. His mind raced as he tried to piece together the fragments of his life that had led him here, to this moment, to this woman. He had no idea who she was, or why she had come to his aid, but he knew one thing for certain. She had saved his life, and for that, he owed her everything. The days passed slowly, and the desert began to cool as the evening winds blew in. The woman had kept him safe, nursing his wounds, and feeding him when he could barely sit up. Her care was steadfast, and in return, he found himself recovering faster than he thought possible. She was no healer, yet her touch was gentle, her knowledge of the land vast, and her ability to navigate the unforgiving desert was unlike anyone he had known. They had spoken little, but the silence between them felt natural, comfortable. Each night, they would sit by the fire, and though he could tell she was restless, she never left. She stayed. He had been too weak to question her motives, but now, with his strength returning, curiosity gnawed at him. His mind wandered back to the countless battles he had fought, the enemies he had vanquished, the alliances he had forged. But this woman, this stranger, was different. The conflict was no longer with other tribes, other warlords, but with himself. He knew he had to understand her, to know why she had saved him. It was a question that had haunted him since the moment he had regained his senses. But now, with his body mending and his mind clear, he found the courage to ask, "Why did you save me?" His voice was still hoarse, but it carried more strength than before. She was silent for a long time, her eyes focused on the fire, the flames dancing in the night's breeze. "You needed help," she said simply. "That's all." It was such an unremarkable answer, yet it left him with more questions than ever. He couldn't fathom how someone could be so selfless, so willing to risk everything for a stranger. But why me? He pressed. Why risk your life for someone like me? She shifted slightly, the firelight casting shadows across her face. Because I know what it's like to be alone, she answered, her voice quiet. To have nothing but the land, the wind, the sand. I've seen enough death to know that we all need help sometimes. Even warriors. He looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. Her eyes met his, and for a fleeting moment, he saw a glimmer of something deep, something painful, behind her gaze. He wanted to ask more, to press for the answers to the many questions swirling in his mind, but something told him it wasn't the time. She wasn't ready to share her story, and perhaps neither was he. Still, the silence between them was no longer heavy. It had shifted, becoming a quiet understanding. A bond, unspoken but clear. The night stretched on, and he realized that with each passing hour, the distance between them seemed to lessen. She had come to his aid not because she saw a warrior in need, but because she saw another human being struggling against the harshness of life. And for that, he couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude he couldn't fully explain. The next morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, they packed their things. The desert was never kind, and though he had no intention of leaving yet, he knew it was time to move. The woman didn't protest, didn't try to persuade him to stay longer. She simply nodded, as if she, too, understood the unspoken truth. The desert was a place that tested all, but it was not a place to linger. The journey ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in years, he did not feel entirely alone. Together, they walked into the rising sun, two strangers bound by an unspoken connection, each carrying their own burdens, but for now, finding solace in the silence between them. The sun was beginning to set, casting an amber glow across the desert. The scorching heat of the day was slowly giving way to the cool evening breeze, but the harshness of the land was ever present. He and the woman had been traveling for days now, the distance between them and the place where they had first met steadily growing. Each day, the desert seemed to stretch endlessly before them, an unrelenting landscape that tested their endurance. His strength had returned, though it was still fragile. The pain in his body had subsided, but the emotional wounds were not so easily healed. They had shared little in the way of words, and perhaps that was for the best. He wasn't ready to open up, and she didn't push him. But there was an understanding between them now, a bond that neither of them had expected but had been forged by the trials they had endured together. She was a mystery to him, and yet there was something familiar in the way she moved, the way she spoke. There was a quiet strength about her that he couldn't ignore. He had seen it before, in the eyes of warriors, in the way they carried themselves, knowing their own strength but not needing to show it. She wasn't like the other women he had known, who cowered behind the men or stayed within the safety of their homes. She was different. He had started to wonder who she really was, where she came from, and why she had helped him. But again, he held those questions back. He didn't want to force her to speak when she wasn't ready. They had camped for the night near a small rock formation that offered some protection from the desert wind. The fire crackled softly between them, casting dancing shadows on their faces. He sat across from her, staring into the flames, as if the fire could offer him some answers. But it didn't. The silence was broken when she spoke, her voice calm, but carrying a weight that made him look up. "We're getting close," she said, her eyes on the horizon. "The valley is just a few more miles." He didn't ask where she was leading them. He had stopped questioning her choices a while ago. There was a quiet assurance in her that he trusted, even though he didn't fully understand it. "You've been here before," he stated, more than asked. She nodded. "A long time ago," she said, her voice softer now. "I've lived many places, but this desert, it leaves a mark on you. You can't forget it." He said nothing, his gaze still fixed on the fire, though his mind was racing. He could sense there was more to her story than she had let on. She had lived through things that had shaped her, scars that ran deeper than the ones on his own body. But she didn't offer more, and he didn't press. They both knew there were things better left unsaid. The stars above them began to shine brighter, the night deepening around them as they settled into the rhythm of the evening. He thought about the days ahead, the challenges they would face, and the unknowns that loomed on the horizon. He didn't know what awaited them in the valley, but something told him it was important. The woman had her own reasons for guiding him, for staying with him, and though he didn't fully understand those reasons yet, he knew they would be revealed in time. The night passed quietly, the only sounds being the crackling fire and the occasional rustle of the desert wind. The next morning, they continued on their journey. The air was cool and crisp, the desert landscape stretching out before them like a blank canvas. As they walked, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. He had been in many battles, faced countless enemies, but this felt different. There was something about this woman, about the path they were on, that made him feel like he was walking into something much bigger than himself. He glanced over at her, her face focused on the horizon, and wondered if she felt the same way. As they moved forward, his mind began to wander again, the unanswered questions piling up. Who was she really? What had she seen in her life that had brought her to this point? And why had she chosen to help him? His thoughts were interrupted when she suddenly stopped, her hand held up in a signal for him to do the same. He froze, instinctively reaching for the hilt of his knife. She turned toward him, her eyes scanning the desert around them. "We're not alone," she whispered. He tensed, his senses alert. He could feel it too, the weight of something unseen lurking just beyond their vision. But what? He waited, his eyes narrowing as he searched the horizon. Then, from behind a cluster of rocks, figures began to emerge. They were not alone. And this time, he knew that whatever came next would change everything. They emerged from behind the rocks like shadows, their faces hidden beneath the dust and heat of the desert. At first, it was hard to tell how many there were, perhaps 5, maybe more, but as they slowly advanced toward the pair, it became clear they weren't just travelers. The woman beside him stiffened, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the strangers. She had been prepared for something like this. He could tell by the way she moved, the way her hand hovered near her belt, where a knife or a weapon might be concealed. He, on the other hand, had been caught off guard. They had been walking for hours, the silence between them a comforting constant, and now this. The men who approached were rugged, hardened by life in the desert, their clothing ragged but practical, their weapons visible, rifles slung over their shoulders, knives at their belts, the unmistakable signs of people used to a life of survival. One man stepped forward, tall and broad, his face covered by a weathered hat and a thick beard. He stopped a few paces from them, sizing them up with calculating eyes. The woman stood her ground, her posture firm, though he could see a subtle tension in her shoulders. This wasn't her first confrontation. "You two lost?" the man asked, his voice rough, carrying a trace of suspicion. The woman didn't answer immediately. She didn't have to. The way she carried herself said enough. But the man pressed on, his tone edging toward mockery. "This desert's a dangerous place for strangers. You might not find what you're looking for out here. Or worse, you might not make it back to your horses." He smiled, a grin that didn't reach his eyes. The woman's eyes flickered briefly toward the horizon, her thoughts hidden behind the calm expression on her face. She turned her gaze back to the man, her voice steady when she spoke. "We're not lost," she said simply. The man seemed to consider this for a moment, his eyes flicking over her and then to him. He didn't speak for a few moments, as if weighing something in his mind. "Then you're either brave or foolish," the man finally muttered. "You'd better turn around. The valley's not a place for travelers, not anymore. Not with what's coming." The last part of his sentence was laced with a certain finality, the warning obvious in his words. But the woman didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped forward, her gaze unyielding. "What's coming?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, but with a sharpness that cut through the air. The man's expression darkened, and the group behind him shifted, as if preparing for something. He didn't answer her right away, but after a few seconds, he spat on the ground, his face tightening. "More trouble than you know," he growled. "And if you've got no business here, I'd suggest you move on before you get caught up in it." His tone was a mix of anger and fear, as if whatever was coming was something he wasn't ready to face either. The woman's eyes narrowed as she studied him, sensing the underlying tension in his words. She opened her mouth to say something, but before she could, a low growl echoed from behind them. The man's expression shifted, and he motioned to the others. "Back off," he barked. "We don't need trouble." But it was too late. Out of the shadows, a figure emerged. From behind a large boulder, stepping into the dim light cast by the fading sun. The stranger was tall, dressed in dark clothing that blended with the desert night. But what caught the woman's attention was the way he moved, graceful, purposeful, with an air of command that made the others hesitate. The man with the rifle stepped back as the figure approached, his eyes narrowing in recognition. "What do you want, Takoda?" the man asked, his voice now tinged with a mixture of fear and respect. The figure didn't answer immediately, his gaze fixed on the woman and the man beside her. There was a brief moment of stillness, and then the man spoke again. "This is not your business. They're just passing through." The figure, Takoda, turned his gaze to him, and the tension in the air thickened. "It's never just passing through," Takoda said, his voice low and steady. "You know that as well as I do. The valley is not a place for people like you anymore. You can't hide from what's coming." His words hung heavy in the air, and the man who had first spoken took a step back, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. The woman watched Takoda carefully, noting the intensity in his gaze. There was something about him, something that told her he wasn't just a passerby. He was part of something bigger, a movement, a tribe. And as she looked back at the man who had warned them, she knew that this valley held more than just a hidden threat. It was the heart of something much deeper, something that had the power to change everything. "We've come for a reason," the woman said, her voice steady but now carrying an edge of determination. "And we won't leave until that reason is fulfilled." Takoda didn't answer immediately. He just stood there, watching her as if trying to assess her, trying to understand who she was. But in that moment, he understood. The valley was about to change, and so were they. The storm that had been brewing in the distance had finally arrived, and they were caught in its path. The silence that followed Takoda's arrival was thick, almost suffocating. The air felt charged, and the tension between the group of men and Takoda was palpable. The woman and the man stood on the edge of the scene, both watching intently as the atmosphere shifted from one of uncertainty to something much more dangerous. Takoda didn't flinch under the scrutiny of the other men. His stance remained unyielding, and his eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the men before him. The man who had spoken earlier, one of the group, took a cautious step back, his expression guarded. It was clear he knew Takoda was not a man to be trifled with. "You don't know what you're meddling with, Takoda," the man said, his voice low and forced. "This valley is ours now. You're not welcome here anymore." Takoda's gaze hardened, but he didn't raise his voice. "It was never yours to take," he said. His words cut through the air like a blade, as if the truth behind them was undeniable. The other men shifted uncomfortably, but they didn't dare challenge him directly. The woman, who had been quietly observing, could feel the pulse of the situation quicken. She knew there was more at play here than just a chance encounter. Something about Takoda's presence, about the way the men reacted to him, made her realize this was no ordinary desert meeting. This valley, this land, they were about to become the center of something much larger. "You don't belong here," the man growled, trying to regain some composure, but his voice trembled with fear. Takoda's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "And yet, I am here," he replied softly. "And I'll be here until this valley belongs to its rightful owners." The woman stepped forward, her voice steady, carrying the weight of her own determination. "We've come to see it through," she said, her gaze moving from Takoda to the group of men who now stood tense, unsure. "Whatever is coming, we'll face it." The men exchanged wary glances. It was clear they had expected resistance, but perhaps not this kind. Takoda turned his eyes toward her, assessing her for the first time in a way that felt different, less like a stranger and more like someone who might be aligned with him. "You've seen the signs," Takoda said to her, his voice low. She nodded, the desert wind pulling at her hair. "I've seen enough," she replied, "and I don't intend to turn back." Takoda's expression softened, just barely, before he shifted his attention back to the group of men. "Then you understand," he said, his voice once again carrying that weight of quiet command. "There's a storm coming, and no one, not even you, can escape it." For a long moment, no one moved. The desert stretched around them, vast and silent, the heat of the day still lingering in the air. The fire crackled softly beside them, a small flame in the grand emptiness of the world. Then, with a sudden movement, one of the men broke the silence. He stepped back, his hand resting on the rifle slung over his shoulder. "I won't be part of this," he said, his voice thick with frustration. I won't follow some fool who's trying to start a war. Takoda's eyes never left the man as he spoke, his expression unwavering. Then go, Takoda said simply. Leave this place before you are swallowed by it. The man hesitated, a flicker of doubt in his eyes, but then he turned, walking away with his head bowed. The remaining men looked at each other, then at Takoda, and finally, they too began to back off, one by one, until only the two of them, the woman and Takoda, remained. She stood still, the weight of what had just transpired settling on her shoulders. Takoda turned to her, his gaze assessing. It's not over, he said, his voice steady. The valley is just the beginning. We've only scratched the surface. The woman met his gaze, her determination stronger than ever. I didn't come this far to turn back now, she said firmly. Takoda's expression softened slightly. Good. You'll need that strength. He turned, signaling for her to follow. There's much more to learn, and the valley holds more than just dust and sand. It holds secrets. As they began to walk, the woman couldn't help but feel a growing sense of urgency. She had followed him into the unknown, trusting that whatever lay ahead was worth the risk. She knew now that the valley, with its harsh landscape and harsh truths, would reveal things far darker than she had anticipated. And as they moved deeper into the desert, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to uncover something that would change everything, not just for her, but for the land itself. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving the desert in a veil of twilight. The air was cooler now, but the sting of the sand still lingered in the breeze. Takoda and the woman moved in silence, their footsteps soft against the shifting sands. It was as though they were walking into the heart of something greater, an ancient pulse that beat through the land itself. As they moved forward, the stillness around them felt heavy, as if the very earth was holding its breath. They approached a small rise, a rocky outcrop that seemed out of place in the vast emptiness of the desert. Takoda stopped, his eyes scanning the surroundings, and then he gestured for her to follow. The woman's heart quickened. She had no idea what was waiting ahead, but there was a sense of urgency in Takoda's movements now. He moved with purpose, every step calculated, his eyes scanning every shadow, every crevice of the landscape. They reached the top of the rise, and before them, the desert spread out like an ocean of sand, but at its center, a dark silhouette loomed against the fading light. It was a structure, old and weathered by time. The woman felt a shiver run down her spine as she realized what it was. An ancient ruin. She turned to Takoda, her voice barely a whisper. What is this place? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the ruin in the distance. This is where it all began, he said quietly. The woman frowned, trying to piece together his words. What do you mean? What began here? Takoda looked at her then, his expression unreadable. The valley is not just a land of dust and sand. It has a history, one that most have forgotten or don't understand. But those of us who know, we know the truth. The woman's curiosity deepened. She had suspected there was more to this valley than met the eye, but hearing Takoda speak in such a way only added to the mystery. She had followed him this far, trusting him, but now, she wondered what secrets lay buried beneath the sands. Takoda led her toward the ruin, his pace steady but filled with a quiet urgency. As they approached, the structure began to take shape, a series of stone walls, half collapsed, weathered by years of neglect. There were carvings on the stones, ancient symbols that seemed to pulse with energy, though they were worn and difficult to read. Takoda paused, his hand brushing against one of the stones, and the woman saw a flash of recognition in his eyes. This is where my people lived, he said softly, before the world changed. The woman's breath caught in her throat. She had suspected Takoda had ties to the land, but hearing him speak of his people, of a past so far removed from the present, struck her in a way she hadn't expected. Takoda turned to her then, his face serious. The valley was once a place of power, a place where many tribes gathered to share knowledge, to forge alliances. But those times are long gone. The woman looked around at the ruin, the silence that hung in the air. And now, she asked. Now, the valley is forgotten. It has become a battleground, a place for those who seek to control what is left of the old world. But the truth lies here, in these stones. Takoda's voice grew quieter, almost reverential. and I will do whatever it takes to protect it. The woman's mind raced as she tried to process his words. The valley, the land, they were more than just a place to survive. There was history here, a legacy that had been lost over time. But the question remained. Why had Takoda brought her here? You've been here before, haven't you? She asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty she felt. Takoda nodded, his gaze distant. Yes, this is where I found the answers I've been searching for. This is where my people's fate was sealed. The woman felt a knot form in her stomach. What happened to them? Takoda turned his eyes to hers, the weight of his history heavy in his gaze. They were betrayed. The land was taken from us, and we were scattered. But not all of us are gone. Some of us remain, hidden in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to reclaim what was lost. The woman's heart raced as the gravity of his words settled over her. She had been drawn into something far larger than herself, something that had been building for years, perhaps even centuries. Takoda stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low whisper. You've already made your choice, haven't you? She looked at him, her mind filled with conflicting emotions. She had come this far, followed him through the desert, trusted him when there was no reason to. And now, she realized, there was no turning back. She had become part of this story, part of the history of this land, whether she was ready or not. Yes, she whispered, her voice firm with resolve. I'm ready. Takoda's gaze softened, a brief flicker of approval passing through his eyes. Then we moved forward. Together. The two of them stood there, at the edge of the ruin, the desert stretching out before them, the shadows growing longer as the night descended. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with dangers and unknowns. But the woman knew one thing for certain. The valley held the key to everything. And she would stand by Takoda, no matter what came next. The air was thick with tension as Takoda and the woman stood together at the edge of the ruin. The stone walls seemed to hum with the energy of ages past, a deep resonance that pulsed through the ground beneath their feet. Takoda turned to her, his expression more serious than ever. We're close, he said quietly. The answers we're looking for are here. But so is the danger. She nodded, her mind racing with the implications of his words. She had come into this journey knowing little, and yet, every step seemed to reveal something new and more complicated than the last. The valley, the ruin, Takoda's connection to the land. It was all connected, but the pieces were still scattered, the picture unclear. What do we do now? She asked, her voice steady despite the weight of the unknown pressing down on her. Takoda's eyes scanned the ruin, the stone structures now bathed in the dim light of the setting sun. We enter. We find what was left behind. And we face what's waiting for us. The woman swallowed, feeling the weight of his words settle over her. She had been following Takoda without fully understanding where it would lead, but now, standing on the brink of something ancient, she realized the depth of what they were about to uncover. Is there anyone else out here? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Takoda's gaze shifted, narrowing slightly. There are others. Those who seek to control what was once ours. They know we're here. And they won't stop until they have what they want. She felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She had suspected that they weren't the only ones after whatever secrets the valley held, but hearing it from Takoda confirmed her worst fears. She had no illusions anymore. This wasn't just a journey through the desert. It was a fight for something far bigger. Takoda began walking toward the entrance of the ruin, his movements calculated, his every step purposeful. The woman hesitated for a moment, her eyes lingering on the horizon, the fading light casting long shadows across the land. This was it, the point of no return. She had made the choice to follow him, to step into the unknown. Now, there was no turning back. She followed him into the ruin, the silence around them pressing in like a heavy weight. The inside of the structure was darker, the walls covered in ancient symbols, their meanings lost to time. The air was thick with the scent of dust and stone, and every step they took seemed to stir the echoes of the past. The woman could feel the history of the place surrounding her, a presence that seemed to whisper from the shadows, urging her forward. They moved deeper into the ruin, Takoda leading the way with a calm confidence that put her at ease. She trusted him. She had no choice. As they entered a larger chamber, the woman's breath caught in her throat. The room was filled with artifacts, pieces of a history long forgotten, yet still preserved by the desert. She could see ancient weapons, broken pottery, and remnants of what had once been a thriving culture. But what caught her eye the most was the stone altar at the center of the room. It was large, carved with intricate designs, its surface worn smooth by centuries of use. Takoda stopped in front of it, his gaze fixed on the altar. "This is where it all began," he said, his voice soft but filled with reverence. The woman stepped closer, her eyes scanning the carvings on the stone. There was something familiar about them, something that tugged at the edge of her memory. But she couldn't place it. "What happened here?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Takoda took a deep breath, his hand brushing against the stone as he spoke. "The tribes used to gather here, to honor the land, to share their knowledge. But then, greed took hold. The land was divided, and our people were scattered. The truth was lost." The woman felt a heavy weight settle in her chest as she listened to Takoda's words. She had known the desert was full of secrets, but she hadn't fully understood how deep those secrets ran. "And now?" she asked. Takoda's eyes met hers, a flicker of something, determination, perhaps, or anger, flashing across his face. "Now we take it back. The valley was never meant to be lost. It's time to reclaim it." His words hung in the air, a promise, a challenge, a call to arms. The woman nodded, feeling the resolve in his voice seep into her own bones. She wasn't just following him anymore. She was part of this. "How do we do that?" she asked, her voice steady. Takoda turned to face her, his gaze intense. "We start by finding what they've hidden." He pointed to the altar, his finger tracing one of the carvings. "This is the key. The answers are here, but so are the risks." The woman stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She had come this far, and now, as the shadows grew longer and the night settled in, she knew there was no turning back. Takoda was right. The valley was the key to everything. And as the air grew colder and the desert night crept in, she felt the weight of their mission settle over her. Whatever they found here, whatever truths they uncovered, it would change the course of their lives forever. The woman stood in front of the stone altar, her heart pounding with anticipation. Takoda was beside her, his gaze fixed on the carvings, his fingers brushing against the ancient stone as if trying to unlock the secrets hidden within. She could feel the weight of history pressing down on them both. The ruin was silent now, the once thriving heart of a powerful tribe now reduced to dust and stone. But there was something about this place, something alive within it, calling to her. Takoda turned to her, his expression unreadable. "The key is here," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 untold stories. "This altar was the center of everything. It holds the answers we need. The truth about what happened to my people." She nodded, her fingers brushing against the carvings. The symbols were foreign to her, yet somehow familiar, as if they were a language she had once known but had forgotten. She could almost hear the whispers of those who had come before there. Voices carried on the wind, urging her to listen. "But why is it hidden?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Takoda's eyes narrowed. "Because those who came after us feared it. They feared what it could reveal. The valley's power was never meant to fall into the wrong hands." The woman felt a shiver run down her spine. She had known the valley was important, but she hadn't fully understood how much was at stake. This wasn't just about land or survival. It was about reclaiming something much deeper, something sacred. As Takoda continued to study the altar, the woman felt a deep sense of unease. The atmosphere in the room had shifted, the air growing thick with a strange energy. Something was stirring, something ancient and powerful. "It's time," Takoda said suddenly, his voice low but steady. "The valley is waking. And so must we." He stepped forward, placing his hand on the altar. The carvings seemed to shimmer, glowing faintly in the dim light. For a moment, the woman thought she saw something move within the stone, a ripple of energy that passed through the carvings like a living thing. "What is that?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and awe. Takoda's eyes met hers, his face expressionless. "The valley is not just a place," he said. "It is a guardian. It holds the memories of those who came before, the ones who walked this land long before us. And it has been waiting for someone to awaken it." The woman stepped forward, her breath catching in her throat. She felt a pull, a magnetic force drawing her toward the altar. She knew in that moment that whatever was coming, whatever secrets were buried beneath the sand, It was more than just a story. It was a destiny that had been waiting for her. Takoda turned to her then, his eyes intense. "You are the key," he said, his voice low but certain. "You always have been. This land chose you the moment you set foot on it." She stared at him, unsure of what he meant. "I don't understand," she said. "What do you want me to do?" Takoda reached out, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "The valley will not reveal its secrets to just anyone. It must be someone who understands the land, someone who can hear its whispers." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "Someone like you." She shook her head, her mind racing. "I'm not like you," she said. "I'm just a traveler." Takoda smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but we are all part of the same story, whether we know it or not." He stepped back from the altar, giving her space. "If you are ready, the valley will show you the way. But be warned, the path is not easy. There are forces that will stop at nothing to keep the truth buried." She looked at him, uncertainty still clouding her mind, but something in his words, something in his presence, made her feel like she wasn't alone. She had made it this far, and there was no turning back now. "I'm ready," she said quietly, her voice firm with resolve. Takoda nodded, and with a final look at the altar, he stepped aside. The woman took a deep breath, her fingers brushing against the stone. The moment her hand made contact, the entire room seemed to shift. The air grew thick with energy, the symbols on the altar glowing brighter now, pulsating with an ancient rhythm. She could hear it now, the whispers of the land, soft at first, then growing louder, as if the very earth was speaking to her. She closed her eyes, letting the sounds wash over her. She could feel the land, the valley, calling to her, urging her to listen, to understand. For the first time, she felt connected to something much larger than herself, something that had existed long before her and would continue long after she was gone. The air around her crackled with energy, and when she opened her eyes again, the room had transformed. The ancient ruins seemed to glow, its walls vibrant with life, the stones no longer just relics, but living, breathing witnesses to the past. "It's beginning," Takoda whispered. The woman turned to him, her heart racing. "What is?" Takoda's gaze was filled with both awe and fear. "The awakening," he said softly, "and with it, the reckoning." The room seemed to vibrate with the weight of those words, and as she stood there, she knew that whatever was coming, it would change everything. And there was no turning back. The air in the chamber had grown thick with anticipation, the glow from the altar's carvings pulsating like the heartbeat of the valley itself. The woman's breath came in shallow gasps as the whispers of the land filled her mind, pulling at her consciousness. She could feel it now, the weight of the past, the echo of ancient voices calling out to her. The room seemed alive, as if the very stones beneath her feet were stirring with the energy of forgotten centuries. Takoda stood at her side, his gaze focused on her as though he, too, felt the power rising within the ruin. "Do you hear it?" he asked quietly, his voice almost lost in the hum of the energy around them. She nodded slowly, unable to speak as the whispers grew louder, more insistent. The symbols on the altar shifted, changing, reforming into new patterns before her eyes. It was as if the valley itself was unveiling its secrets, unlocking memories that had been buried for generations. Takoda stepped closer, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "The land is calling to you," he said, his voice steady but filled with reverence. "It wants to show you the truth, but you must listen carefully." The woman closed her eyes, focusing on the whispers, allowing them to wash over her. She could feel the weight of them, like 1,000 years of knowledge pressing into her mind. She saw images flicker in the darkness, visions of warriors and elders, of battles fought and alliances broken, of a time when the valley was a place of power, a place where many tribes gathered. The images shifted again, darker now, showing a world where greed and betrayal had torn those tribes apart. She saw the valley split, its power stolen by outsiders, its protectors scattered to the winds. And then she saw him, the leader, the one who had once united the tribes. His face was familiar, yet she couldn't place him. He was standing at the center of the valley, his arms raised high, as if calling for something. The scene shifted once more, and she saw a figure standing behind him. A woman. Her face, too, was familiar, but it was fleeting, her features barely visible before they vanished completely. A shiver ran down her spine as she tried to focus on the woman's face, but it was gone, like a shadow, slipping out of reach. She gasped, the vision fading, leaving her standing in the ruin, her heart racing. "What was that?" she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of what she had seen. Takoda's eyes were closed now, his face a mask of concentration. "It was a vision," he said softly. "The past, the present, and the future, all intertwined. You saw what happened to my people, to the valley. But there's more." He stepped closer, his gaze intense. "You saw the woman. She was the one who betrayed us. She was the one who allowed the valley to be taken. But she was also the key. She has a connection to you, to this land." The woman shook her head, confusion clouding her thoughts. "I don't understand," she murmured. "Why would I see her? Why would I be connected to all of this?" Takoda's voice was filled with quiet certainty as he spoke. "Because you are the one who will restore what was lost. The valley chose you the moment you set foot here. The woman you saw, she was part of your past, part of the reason you are here now. And you are the only one who can reclaim what was stolen." The weight of his words hit her like a storm, the implications crashing down on her all at once. She had come here searching for answers, but she had never imagined that she would become part of the story herself. She had never expected to be the one to change the course of history. But here she was, standing in the heart of a land that had once been a place of great power, now a battleground for its future. Takoda stepped back, his gaze never leaving hers. "The valley is waking," he said, "but it is not yet whole. It needs you to bring it back, to restore the balance. But there are those who will stop at nothing to keep it in the dark. They know you are here. They know you are the key." The woman took a deep breath, steadying herself as she absorbed the gravity of what Takoda had just revealed. She had been brought here for a reason, a purpose far greater than anything she could have imagined. She had seen the past, but now, she had to shape the future. The whispers of the land were growing louder, urging her to act, to claim what was hers. The time for hesitation was over. "I'm ready," she said, her voice firm with resolve. Takoda nodded, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. "Then we move forward. We will face whatever comes together. The valley's secrets are within reach, but we must fight to uncover them. And we will." The woman turned her gaze back to the altar, the stone symbols now glowing with an intensity that matched the fire in her heart. She had come to this place as a stranger, but she was leaving it as something more. She was part of the valley's story now, part of its legacy, and she would do whatever it took to see it restored. As they moved deeper into the ruin, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed in the distance. The valley was waking, and so were its protectors. They would face what was coming, together. And this time, the past would not be forgotten. The woman stood before the altar, the pulse of the valley growing stronger with each passing moment. The whispers of the land seemed to swirl around her, filling the space with an energy that was almost tangible. The symbols on the stone glowed faintly, their meaning now clearer in her mind. The valley was alive, and it was calling to her, urging her to take the next step. Takoda stood by her side, his gaze steady and unwavering as he observed the altar, the symbols, the pulse of the land. He had seen this before, this awakening. But even now, he couldn't help but feel the weight of what was about to unfold. He had known that the valley was more than just a place, more than just a memory of the past. But now, standing here with her, he realized that the truth was far more complicated than he had ever imagined. "The valley is ready," Takoda said, his voice low, reverberating with the gravity of the moment. "But so are the forces that wish to keep it hidden. We have no time to waste." The woman turned to him, her eyes full of determination. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. Takoda looked at her, a flicker of approval passing across his face. "Now we uncover the truth. But we do it on our terms." He stepped forward, placing his hand on the altar, his fingers tracing the ancient symbols as he had done countless times before. The stone beneath his hand seemed to pulse, responding to his touch, and the woman felt a surge of energy course through the air. She stepped closer, her heart pounding in her chest. This was the moment. This was what they had been waiting for. The secrets of the valley would be revealed, and with them, the power to reclaim what had been lost. She reached out, her hand brushing against Takoda's. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and in that look, she understood everything. Takoda nodded, as if confirming the unspoken truth between them. We face this together, he said softly. She nodded, a quiet resolve settling in her chest. There was no turning back now. They had come this far, and they would see it through, no matter what. Takoda turned back to the altar, his hand still resting on the stone. The air around them seemed to grow heavier, the energy in the room intensifying. The symbols on the altar shifted, their glow growing brighter until it lit up the entire room, casting shadows on the walls. The ground beneath them trembled, a low rumble vibrating through the stone. The woman could feel it, a surge of power rising from deep within the valley, something ancient and undeniable. It's happening, Takoda said, his voice almost a whisper. The valley is awakening. The secrets are coming to the surface. The woman's heart raced as the light from the altar grew brighter, nearly blinding her. She felt the power of the valley coursing through her, filling her with a sense of purpose she had never known before. This was her moment, her chance to reclaim what was lost, to restore the balance that had been shattered so long ago. The ground shook once more, and a deafening roar filled the air, as if the very earth was calling out. The woman gripped the edge of the altar, her fingers digging into the stone as the power around them intensified. Takoda stepped back, his expression unreadable, his eyes fixed on the altar. This is it, he said quietly. The truth will be revealed. As the last of the symbols on the altar shifted into place, a great burst of energy erupted from the stone, blinding in its intensity. The woman closed her eyes, feeling the rush of power wash over her, filling her with a sense of purpose and knowledge that she could not yet fully comprehend. When she opened her eyes again, the world had changed. The room was no longer just a ruin, but a living testament to the power that had once flowed through the valley. The walls glowed with ancient energy, and the air was thick with the presence of those who had come before. She could see them now, visions of the past, of the people who had once inhabited this land, standing before her as if they were still alive. They were watching her, waiting for her to understand, to take her place among them. Takoda stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over the visions. This is what was lost, he said, his voice filled with awe. The knowledge, the power, the connection to the land. It was all taken from us, hidden away. But now it's ours again. The woman felt a deep sense of connection to the visions, to the people who had once walked this land. She could feel their strength, their wisdom, their pain. And in that moment, she understood. She had been brought here for a reason. She was the key to restoring what had been lost. The valley had chosen her. Takoda turned to her, his eyes filled with a quiet intensity. The valley has given us the truth. Now, we must protect it. The woman nodded, her heart filled with a newfound purpose. She wasn't just a traveler anymore. She was part of something far greater, something that would shape the future of this land. Together, they would reclaim the valley, and with it, the power that had once been theirs. And they would make sure that nothing could take it from them again. The power that had erupted from the altar was still humming in the air, a low, vibrating pulse that resonated deep in the woman's chest. She stood there, surrounded by the visions of the past, feeling the weight of the valley's history settle over her like a mantle. The whispers had grown louder, but they were no longer just voices. They were memories, ancient and raw, calling out to her, urging her to understand. Takoda had stepped back, his face unreadable, but she could see the flicker of something deep in his eyes. He was watching her, waiting for her to realize what had been awakened. She turned her gaze to the altar once more, her fingers still tingling from where they had touched the stone. The symbols were no longer just markings on a surface. They had become part of her, seeping into her skin, into her very soul. She could feel the land calling to her, as though it had been waiting for this moment. She had been brought here for a reason. She had to see it through. The air grew heavy, the visions around her more intense. She saw herself standing among the people who had once lived in this valley, walking with them, talking with them. They were not just figures in her mind. They were real as the land itself. She could hear their voices, their laughter, the sound of their feet on the earth, and for a moment, it felt as though they were still alive, still watching over her. Then, the vision shifted. She saw darkness creeping in, shadows that swallowed the valley whole. The people were fighting, scattered, lost in the face of something they couldn't understand, something that had come to destroy them. She saw the woman again, the one from her earlier vision, standing among them. But this time, she wasn't just a bystander. She was part of the chaos, her face twisted in betrayal, her hands stained with blood. The woman's heart clenched as the vision played out, a sense of sorrow and regret washing over her. She had seen this woman before, in glimpses and fragments, but now she realized the truth. The woman had played a part in the valley's downfall. She had been the key to its destruction. And now, the woman was connected to her, linked by blood, by fate. The visions faded, leaving her standing in the chamber, gasping for air. The weight of what she had seen pressed heavily on her, but she knew it was not over. This was only the beginning. Takoda's voice broke through the silence. "You've seen it, haven't you?" She nodded, though her throat was tight, and her heart still raced from the intensity of the vision. "Yes," she whispered. "I understand now. The woman, she was the one who betrayed them. But she was also part of me. I've been connected to this from the start." Takoda stepped forward, his face somber. "Yes, she was a part of your past, and you are a part of this valley's future." He paused, his gaze locked on hers. "You must be ready. What was lost can be reclaimed, but only if you accept what comes next. The valley will not forgive those who seek to control it, and it will not forget." The woman felt a surge of resolve rise within her, the weight of Takoda's words settling over her like armor. She had come to this place seeking answers, but now, she had found more than she had bargained for. The valley was more than just a land. It was a living, breathing entity, and it was waiting for her to take her place in its story. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady, the certainty in her words echoing in the chamber. Takoda nodded, a flicker of approval in his eyes. "Good. But the path ahead will not be easy. There are those who will stop at nothing to keep the valley's secrets buried, and they will come for us." The woman straightened, her shoulders squared with determination. "I won't let them," she said, the words tasting like truth on her tongue. Takoda's expression softened, his gaze shifting toward the door of the ruin, as though sensing the danger approaching. "Then we move forward. The valley will not reveal its secrets to just anyone, but it has chosen you. And now, it's time for you to claim what is rightfully yours." The woman looked back at the altar, the glowing symbols pulsing with a rhythm that matched her own heartbeat. She felt the connection between them, the power of the valley, the strength of those who had come before her. She was ready. The valley was awakening, and she would be its guardian. Together with Takoda, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. They would fight for the truth, for the land, and for the legacy that had been lost. As they stepped out of the chamber and into the fading light of the desert, the woman felt the weight of the valley's history settle in her bones. The past and future were intertwined, and she was the bridge between them. The desert was vast, and the journey ahead was uncertain, but she knew one thing for sure: nothing would stand in her way. The valley's time had come, and so had hers. The desert night had settled over them, the stars glittering like distant memories in the dark sky above. The valley was still, save for the occasional whisper of the wind against the stone, carrying with it the weight of all the years that had passed. Takoda and the woman stood side by side, their backs to the ruin, gazing out at the vast expanse that lay before them. They had come so far, and yet, the journey was far from over. The valley had awakened, but now it was up to them to protect it, to ensure that the secrets buried here were never lost again. The woman felt the power of the land surging through her, felt the strength of those who had walked this path before her. She was no longer a stranger to this place. She was a part of it. She turned to Takoda, her voice steady with purpose. "What now?" she asked, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Takoda looked at her, his expression calm, but the intensity in his eyes was unmistakable. "Now, we make sure the valley's power is protected," he said, his voice low but filled with conviction. "There are still those who will come for it, for the knowledge that lies here. We can't allow that." The woman nodded, her mind already racing with the weight of their task. "How do we stop them?" she asked, her voice unwavering. Takoda's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "We fight," he said simply. The woman's heart quickened. She had known that this day would come, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure if she was truly ready. She had followed Takoda into the heart of the valley, and now they were facing a battle that would determine its future. But she wasn't afraid. She could feel the land beneath her feet, its energy flowing through her, and she knew that she was not alone. "We fight for the valley," she repeated, her voice strong. Takoda's smile grew wider. "Yes, for the valley, for its people, for the future." He turned, his gaze sweeping over the land. "It's time to take our place in history." They both turned their attention to the valley, to the land that had been scarred by time and betrayal, but still held the potential for renewal. The valley had been a place of power, and it would be again. But this time, it would be theirs to protect. The woman could feel the shift in the air, the pull of the valley's energy drawing her in. She stepped forward, her hand reaching out to touch the ground beneath her. The earth seemed to respond to her touch, the energy flowing up through her fingertips, filling her with a sense of strength and purpose. She closed her eyes, allowing the power of the valley to wash over her, filling her with the knowledge of those who had come before. She understood now. She understood her place in this story. She was not just a traveler. She was the guardian of the valley's legacy. She opened her eyes, meeting Takoda's gaze. He, too, had felt the change in the air, and he nodded to her, as if acknowledging that they were ready. "Let's begin," he said, his voice steady, filled with resolve. Together, they began their march toward the heart of the valley, toward the battle that would shape the future. The wind picked up, swirling around them as if the land itself was urging them forward. The desert, with all its harshness, its dangers, had tested them, but it had also forged them into something stronger. They were no longer just two people caught in the currents of fate. They were the protectors of the valley, the ones who would ensure its survival, its rebirth. The journey had been long, filled with uncertainty, but now they were ready. The valley had chosen them, and they would answer its call. As they moved deeper into the valley, the woman could feel the power of the land all around them, its energy pulsing in the air like the heartbeat of the earth itself. The valley was waking, and it was time to restore it to its former glory. They reached the center of the valley, where the ancient stone structures stood, their weathered surfaces marking the place where the past and present met. The air was thick with energy, and the woman could feel the presence of those who had come before, their spirits watching over them. Takoda turned to her, his face filled with determination. "This is where it all comes together," he said. "We protect the valley, or we lose it forever." She nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew what they had to do. Together, they would protect the valley, its power, its secrets, and its legacy. The land had chosen them to carry its story forward, and they would not fail. The woman stepped forward, her hand resting on the stone. The valley had spoken to her, and now, it was time for her to answer. With Takoda by her side, she felt stronger than ever. The valley would survive. The valley would be restored, and they would make sure that nothing could ever take it from them again. In this gripping tale of survival and destiny, the valley comes alive with mystery, ancient power, and untold secrets, set in the heart of the desert. The woman, a wanderer with no clear purpose, and Takoda, a warrior bound to the land, face trials that test their courage and strength as they uncover the lost history of the valley. With a series of powerful visions and the awakening of ancient forces, the story unfolds like a classic Western adventure, filled with betrayal, redemption, and the struggle for survival. As the woman discovers her own connection to the valley's past, she is thrust into a battle that will shape the future of this land. As they journey deeper into the ruins, Takoda and the woman must confront enemies and protect what remains of their heritage. Their bond grows as they face impossible odds, bringing to life the very essence of Western stories, where the past, present, and future collide in a fight for justice and survival. From the moment the valley's secrets are revealed, they know they must defend it or lose it forever. This is not just another Western story. It's a tale of courage, betrayal, and the fight to reclaim what was once lost, as the woman steps into a destiny that will change everything. The struggle ahead is fierce, and they must stay united if they are to protect the valley's legacy. These Western stories are more than just about the land. They are about the people who rise to protect it, no matter the cost.